If I'm act, this is the one part that I don't have nothing to say about. It's, you just had your run-in with Jim, varying details there, but I wouldn't be talking about. I don't think it wasn't the friendliest.
If you somebody like Akademiks, as big as his mouth is, you're going to say something about that being little because it's funny. Especially his build. He already built like a baby mom. I'm not a big fan of people that are like not in the streets at all, doing all street content. I just don't get that.
The Joe Budden podcast goes off on Akademiks. Yeah, on the recent episode of the show, Joe Budden and his co-host would have some not so nice things to say about Akademiks in light of his back and forth with Maino and the rest of the co-hosts with the Let's Rap About It podcast that features Jim Jones, Maino, Davies, and Fab. So essentially, they were reacting to all of the drama. And the one with the most to say was Mona, aka Don't Call Me White Girl. And she was saying that Ak isn't from the streets and shouldn't comment on the streets. Now, I think she was really having some pent-up frustration with Ak's rise to fame in the hip-hop industry, hip-hop media, and she's been waiting to get this off on Ak for quite some time. She even said something about how she has heard that Akademiks has a micro penis. Now, she said this because Maino said the same thing. He said that he spoke with some women in the industry that said they call him Chicken Nugget. But she was going off on Akademiks. She was damn near calling him corny, a lame, a buster, as they would say on the West Coast. And I was surprised at how much this cast was just getting their shots off on Akademiks, with even Ish saying that, yo, you can't really comment on the streets if you're not from the streets. You know, that whole old lingo that these guys love to hide behind because they want to protect the streets from some reason, even though they're not really in street life, nor were they that heavy into the streets to be taking the position that they do. But what was even more interesting is that Imani would initially say that Akademiks can report on the streets, but then later pivot towards saying that Akademiks shouldn't play with Maino because he wouldn't do that if he were broke. Though I would argue Maino is making content, and I think it sets a bad precedent if only the street dudes are able to diss people and there not be any type of retribution. What the podcast is doing, what they're arguing for, is basically the same type of stuff that happens in the music industry, where the street dudes can talk about people, but everybody else has to stay quiet. This is the era Joe Budden's from. That's the era Imani's from. And Imani also says Akademiks shouldn't play with Maino, but I think Akademiks dissed Fab first. I don't believe he went at Maino. And like I said, these guys are on the podcast where they're commenting on pop culture. I would hope that they know that they are part of the pop culture in which they comment on. So I think this podcast missed the mark a little bit, but this is their takes. It's an antiquated take, not particularly novel, something I've heard before from people over the age of 35, 40. They feel like Akademiks should not be allowed in the industry, but it's like they don't acknowledge that it's not about who allows you in the industry. It's about how hard you work and the place you put yourself in. But the most interesting critique came from his former ally, or maybe they're still allies, Joe Budden. He was critiquing how Akademiks said, yo, you can't bring that street stuff into this towards Maino. And Joe Budden was saying, yo, you can't say that. If Akademiks wants to go out there and say something about Maino, he can no longer control if Maino takes it to the streets. Plus, Joe Budden also brings up how there's a story about how Jim Jones ran into Akademiks. It's not a story, I think Akademiks confirmed it, and that there's conflicting reports about what happened. So apparently, maybe Joe has heard more details about this incident, this back and forth, and he's just saying that Joe Budden, he's saying that Akademiks should be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more, choosy about the conflicts he gets into, because you don't really want to play with dudes like Jim Jones and Maino. And I think that's good advice. But these guys make content, man. I don't like what the Joe Budden podcast does sometimes with this street stuff, is that they say we don't want to talk about the streets, but yet they glorify the streets. So that's a way you guys talk about the streets. I remember when the Young Thug trial broke, everybody on the cast was like, yo, this is crazy what they do to hip hop. Y'all had no facts about the case. Y'all had no facts about what happened. People were dying out there in ATL, and y'all still presented it as if this is wrong, this is an assault. I don't get it. Another thing I wanted to say before I wrap up is, yo, man, is Joe Budden and Akademiks cool? I think they cool, like industry cool, but I don't think they ever cool like they used to be. I feel as if something went wrong. Akademiks did something Joe Budden didn't like as far as his content, and Joe Budden was like, I gotta distance myself. Whether it be the Rock Nation full-on frontal assault that Akademiks is going on, and we also have to look at how Jim Jones and all these dudes, they very much, like, they ride with Hove now. Like, they Rock Nation affiliates damn near. And I think that anybody who goes at Rock Nation, they are blackballed to a certain extent. Not black, I don't want to say blackballed, but like the people who rock with Hove will no longer affiliate with folks who go at Rock Nation. I think Akademiks is that. So, do you guys think that Joe Budden and Akademiks are still cool? Or do you guys think they're at arm's length? Because Akademiks hasn't been on the Joe Budden podcast in quite some time. And Joe Budden hasn't done anything with Akademiks in quite some time. So what is going on here? And I also want to end this video by saying, Mona, you better be very careful. Largely because she was sounding off on Akademiks. And Akademiks, it's not Akademiks. The Academy account would tweet, hey, you better watch out. Akademiks going to diss you. And I think Akademiks going to completely diss Mona. And the reason why I say Mona better be careful is because when Tony the Closer was going at Mona, she seemed to be uncomfortable with that whole situation. And I actually believe that Mona is quite sensitive and she does not like being involved with the mess. But the way she talked about Akademiks would lead me to believe that she's okay. She wants to pop out. And I think that's a dangerous, dangerous thing to do. One thing I want to say, I don't want to hear the Akademiks only goes at women when he starts shooting at Mona, because that is what we like to do when dudes react to women in media. We start saying, oh, why he, like, I saw Lauren LaRosa basically call out Akademiks, and then when Akademiks responded, it was like, yo, how dare he? He shouldn't be going. You should be able to respond to anybody. You should be able to go at anybody who mentions your name. Now, of course, there's rules of engagement that are within everybody's head, but the simple response should not be critiqued. You know what I'm saying? Because Akademiks just went at Maino, and he isn't a woman. Akademiks goes at a lot of dudes, and I'm not trying to toot Akademiks' horn, but what I am saying is that Mona was the first one to shoot at Ak, and she's been shooting at Ak for quite some time, so I think it would be disingenuous when he shoots back if we take that stance. Now, Mark Lamont Hill didn't really say much. I think he's aware of, media. Like, I think he believes in media and thinks media should report on things. And he's aware of how folks kind of have to navigate. Because I've always said this, man. A lot of people on the Joe Budden podcast, they have this stance, but they are people who are on a show that is established. They don't know what it takes to find a lane, carve out a niche, or do something by themselves. They are standing on the shoulders of someone else. So they get to take these approaches to things. Whereas I think people like Flip, people like Mark, they know that sometimes you just got to find a way. And I encourage everybody who's in a position where they got to find a way to find that way. Sure, the war in Chirac was problematic, but it was something people wanted to listen to. And like I said, it was actually not that anti-Ak. He was standing with Ak. It only is an issue because Ak blew up. If Ak never gets past that phase, we never talk about him. But because it was an issue at the time and a big deal now, then it gets brought up. And that's my point, is sometimes the way you find yourself into the game is not something you're going to see in a great light, because when you were young, when Ak was young, I assume in his early 20s, maybe even closer to teenager, he thought that was fine. But now I'm sure he wouldn't do that. And on top of that, that whole channel was demonetized. So Ak had to find a new way, a new thing to do. He had to put in a lot of work after in order to get back to a place where he could get monetized, and he did, and we have to give him credit for that. But let me know what you think. Do you feel like Mona was grandstanding? I feel like this whole pod grandstands, especially when it comes to that street stuff. These dudes act like the street stuff is some type of royalty. Hey guys, a lot of people know people from the streets. You know, we've talked to people from the streets. We've been related to people from the streets. And all they do is say that the streets is a myth. The streets lead to a lot of consequences that people are not ready for. You guys don't hold them accountable because you're doing some type of street networking vibes over everything thing. But we don't have to subscribe to that. This is podcasting. We shouldn't disrespect street people, but we should keep it real and point out that there's a lot of flaws in that line of thinking. And the way you guys approach street thinking is somewhat disgusting. All right, y'all. Follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.